Hi everyone, welcome to my channel Bibbidi Bobbidi Books. My name is Ellie and today I'm really excited to be doing a review of the Book of Gothel by Mary McMine. So I actually read and finished this book yesterday, so it's quite fresh in my mind, and I do have quite a lot of thoughts about this story, so I thought this would be quite a fun one to review. If you want a really quick summary, I did enjoy this book for the most part, although there were a few issues and things that I wish were slightly different. So what is this book actually about? So the tagline for this story is that we all know the story of Rapunzel in her tower, but do you know the story of the witch who put her there? So this is very much a origin story of Mother Gothel, who is the traditional villain in the story that we all know of Rapunzel, and it's quite a different spin on that story, which I do enjoy. I'm going to put this book down because I feel like holding it up is going to be annoying after a while. So to give you a little bit more about the plot of this story, so in this book we're following our main character who starts off as a teenage girl, and she's called Halewise, and she lives with her father who's a fisherman and her mother who is a midwife, and they have a very humble life. They're kind of peasants really. They struggle to make ends meet, and there's also quite a lot of tension within the family because Halewise's father is an Orthodox Christian, whereas her mother believes a little bit more in the old religion, which is very much rooted in nature, and that does cause a little bit of conflict within her family. And to make matters worse, Halewise actually suffers with these fainting spells, and she also has these really dark black eyes, and she's very sensitive to the sunlight because of that. And because she's a little bit different, a lot of the people in her village are quite frightened of her, and they think that she's actually possessed by a demon. And Halewise is very fortunate to have her mother on her side, and her mother very much protects her from these other villagers and things. But things take a turn for the worse when her mother becomes unwell and actually ends up passing away. That isn't a spoiler, it's on the back of the book. And without her mother there to protect her, Halewise is actually in quite a dangerous situation, and she's forced to flee her home, and she decides to seek out this place called Gothel, which is a tower of legend hidden in the forest. And she finds this tower, and it's inhabited by this elderly woman who is a healer and a midwife like Halewise's mother was, and this elderly woman also is quite knowledgeable about the old ways. So Halewise decides to become her apprentice. But Halewise isn't the only person to seek sanctuary in the Tower of Gothel, and she actually meets this noble woman called Rika, and the two of them strike up a friendship, and without wanting to give too much away, Halewise basically becomes entangled in this web of political machination and ancient magic. So that's kind of the setup for the story really, and I think the first thing that I want to talk about in this review is the structure of the book, because interestingly Mary McMine used the prologue and the epilogue to kind of frame the story. So both the prologue and epilogue actually take place in modern day, and they follow a scholar who has specialised in folklore and fairy tales, and this scholar gets a tip that there is this ancient manuscript that has been uncovered in Germany, and so she flies to Germany to read this ancient manuscript. And this book is like bound up, and it's called the Book of Gothel, and it's actually a journal that was written by Halewise. So it's her basically narrating her story and telling the real life events of what actually happened. So I really enjoy that idea. I like the thought of someone stumbling across this ancient manuscript which was hidden away in the basement of this cottage, and reading for the first time a different perspective on this story that we all know. So yeah, I thought that was quite an interesting way to structure the book. Obviously the main text is actually the Book of Gothel, so it's literally Halewise telling us her story, and it has that journal-like feeling, and I quite like that because it felt like a very traditional fairy tale. I felt like Halewise was literally, you know, telling me her story, and it felt quite cozy and also quite enchanting because of that. And I also enjoyed how that structure meant that there could be moments where Halewise could reflect on her decisions and things, because she wrote this Book of Gothel when she was an older woman, and she's kind of reflecting on the things that she did when she was younger, so she has the opportunity to kind of pick up on maybe her past mistakes and to comment on things that she thought at the time with the perspective of hindsight. So I really enjoyed that because it made her feel like more of a real character. She was quite self-aware, and yeah, I just quite enjoyed that. Okay, so next up I want to talk about the setting of this story. So the Book of Gothel actually takes place in Germany in the Middle Ages, so it's a real world setting and it has those sort of fantastical elements woven into it, which I did enjoy. And what I particularly liked was that the author actually included real life historical figures like Saint Hildegard into this narrative, which just made it feel more kind of grounded. It felt like it really was kind of like a part of our history almost, so I really liked the fact that it was this real life setting with fantastical elements included. I also really enjoyed how the author interwove different fairy tales into the narrative. So I know that this is pitched as a Rapunzel retelling or a Mother of Gothel origin story, but what I will say is that we didn't really see much of that traditional Rapunzel story. We didn't see any events from that story that you might be familiar with really until towards the end of the book, so it felt very much like a story of its own. So I feel like if you're looking for a real retelling of Rapunzel, then you might be a little bit disappointed by this one, because yes, it is technically kind of an origin story of Mother Gothel, but the focus of the story is very much on Helwise and her journey, and not so much on what you might think of as a Rapunzel story, so just keep that in mind. But what I did enjoy is that we also saw other fairy tales interwoven into this book, so you might recognise little portions from Snow White or maybe Red Riding Hood, and I really enjoyed how those kind of interconnected and came together to form this new kind of version of events. So yeah, I love the fact that there were different traditional fairy tales that were woven into this book. Okay, so next up I want to talk about the pacing of this story. Now I would definitely describe this as a slow-paced book. It's definitely not going to be for you if you like books that have lots of action in, and if you're a plot-driven reader, because it's very much kind of a slow character story really. We spend a lot of time in the beginning of the book exploring Halewise's childhood, which I actually really enjoyed because I feel like it made us really understand her as a character. It made us kind of appreciate the decisions that she ends up making and really formed her as a character. So I think it was really important to see her upbringing and how that changed her as a person and affected her decisions that she ends up making. But some people might find that a little bit slow. I also feel like we spent quite a lot of time in the Tower of Gothel when she is being an apprentice to this elderly woman who is a healer and a midwife, and I feel like a little bit of that could have maybe been cut down a little bit, because other parts of the story felt like they were a little bit more rushed and a little bit less well explained. So for me, the pacing just felt a little bit off in this story, and it's probably my main criticism with the book really, because yeah, it just something didn't feel quite right about the pacing of the book, if that makes sense. Anyway, moving on to characters. So obviously this is Halewise's story. She's telling us her narrative, she's recounting events of her past, so she is very much the focus of the story, and I did really enjoy her as a character. I found her to be quite complex, which was quite interesting to read about. She starts off as a very naive young woman, and she kind of learns the ways of the world the hard way, and she turns into quite a fierce and determined woman, and is actually quite brutal by the end of the story. I would definitely describe her as morally grey, and I quite liked that about her character. She wasn't necessarily always likable, which I think is quite interesting. And in fact, a lot of the characters in this story I would describe as morally grey, and you could definitely see that the characters were driven by their own aims and by their own sort of personal gains, which I also thought was quite interesting and made the characters feel a little bit more real. I will say that some of the side characters aren't fleshed out wholly, so the focus is much more on Halewise, but yeah, I found her quite an interesting character to follow, and I really enjoyed her progression across the story. Okay, so next up I wanted to talk about the magic in this book. Now I would definitely describe the magic in this story as a soft magic system. So if you're the kind of person who likes strict rules and likes to know exactly how the magic works, then I feel like you might not necessarily get on with this book, because it is much more a traditional sense of magic and you just kind of have to accept it for what it is, if that makes sense. So a lot of the magic in this story revolves around religion. For example, our main character Hailwise gets strength from praying to the mother, who is this goddess that she kind of worships, I suppose. And Hailwise also has a really unique ability to be able to sense when souls can come into or exit this world, and she uses that ability very much to her advantage as a midwife, because she does actually train as a midwife, initially with her mother and then with the elderly women at the Tower of Gothel as well. And so yeah, she can kind of sense when the souls are coming, you know, into the world, when a child is being born, or if things are going the opposite direction, and when it feels like souls are slipping away from this world. So I thought that was really quite interesting. There are also magical items in this book as well. So for example, there is a magic mirror, which is something that you might recognize from traditional fairy tales, and these items seem to work by these magic runes that are inscribed on them, and also you use them by speaking in an ancient language. So I feel like it's quite a traditional take on magic in this story, which I think actually worked quite well, considering this is kind of a very fairy tale like story, and it felt suitable for the setting as well. But it's definitely the kind of magic that you just kind of have to go with, and you have to accept that magic happens. And there were quite a lot of questions which were left unanswered, which I did find a little bit frustrating at times. So just be mindful of that as well before you go into this story. Okay, and finally I just wanted to talk a little bit about some of the themes in this story. So I would definitely describe this book as a feminist fairy tale. So it's very much about women coming together to protect each other in a very patriarchal society where men have all of the power. And I did enjoy that theme in this story. I enjoyed all of the female characters and their kind of involvement in the political side of things, and I enjoyed those themes of women sticking together. And for example, the Tower of Gothel is actually considered a sanctuary for women who need help, and men can't actually find the Tower of Gothel. So yeah, it's a very big focus on kind of women protecting each other in this story, and I did enjoy that, although I do feel like it was a little bit on the nose at times, because it did feel like pretty much all of the male characters were evil in this book, and I just would have liked a little bit more nuance. We did have a love interest character who wasn't necessarily evil in this book, but I feel like he was the only male character who wasn't sort of villainized. So yeah, I would have just appreciated a little bit more nuance. The other theme that I thought was very prominent in this book was motherhood. So there are a lot of scenes in this book involving pregnancy and difficult childbirth. So if that is something that you are sensitive to, then just be warned of that before you go into this one, and you might want to go and read up a little bit more about the trigger warnings in this story. But yeah, obviously our main character learns the skill of midwifery, and she attends several births in this story, and we see several different mothers in this story. Obviously we've got Hailwise's mother, who was very protective of Hailwise during her life, and would do anything to save her, and I really enjoyed the relationship that was shown between Hailwise and her mother, both before and after death in grief. I also enjoyed seeing how Hailwise enjoyed her work as a midwife, and how she was experiencing these maternal instincts and maternal feelings throughout the story, and how that shaped her decisions as well. Hailwise also worships the mother, who is this goddess who is both very nurturing and also quite fierce, which I quite enjoyed. And so yeah, I feel like there was quite a lot of discussion about motherhood and the love of a mother in all different forms, and I thought that that was a really interesting theme in this book, and definitely something that is, I would say, a central focus of the story, and I did actually really enjoy that. Another theme that I really enjoyed was the discussion about orthodox versus less structured religion, so kind of orthodox versus, I suppose, paganism, or kind of older traditional folkloric type of religions. And that is actually a theme that I do enjoy reading about. So yes, I did enjoy seeing that in this story, and I do think that it was well done, although I do wish that we had a little bit more information about particularly the older religion, because I feel like I had quite a lot of questions and I just wanted to know a little bit more information about this mother figure and just a little bit more about those traditions and how that all worked. And I did feel like I had quite a lot of questions that were left unanswered after reading this book, which was a little bit frustrating, although to be fair, it did make it feel quite otherworldly and quite mysterious, which might be what the author was going for. But yeah, I just wish we had a little bit more information about the different religions and where they came from and things like that, just because I'm interested in that type of thing. And finally, we did have a bit of a romance plot in this story. I would say that it isn't a main focus, or it certainly wasn't a main focus for me anyway. To be honest, I didn't really care too much about the romance, and I found the love interest character quite one-dimensional. But that didn't bother me too much because, as I say, it wasn't the main focus of the story for me, and it wasn't a huge portion of the book either. But I do appreciate how it was included because, again, it just added more complexity to our main character and made us understand a little bit more about her motivations and the things that shape her as a character. So I did like that it was included in there. I will say that the romance in here is very traditional. It's the kind of romance that you would expect to see in a classic fairy tale. It's the kind of you know, one true love, soulmate, slightly over the top type of romance, which I normally wouldn't enjoy, but I actually felt like it was quite suitable for this particular story because it did give it a very traditional feeling. But yeah, if you're the kind of person that doesn't enjoy that type of kind of over the top romance, then you might not necessarily get on with this one. And also, if you're just looking for a book that has quite a lot of romance in, again, you might not necessarily get on with this one because for me it wasn't the main focus of the story. Okay, so that brings me to the end of this video. I really hope that you found it useful. Please let me know if you've read this book before and what your thoughts and feelings were. Did you agree with me? Did you disagree with me? I'd love to have a conversation with you down in the comments section. Don't forget to like this video if you liked it and subscribe if you want to see more from me. I hope you're having a fantastic day, whatever it is you are doing. And yeah, I guess I'll see you next time with another video. Bye!